What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back for season 5 of the Seattle Kraken. A season which I firmly believe, when all is said and done, years and years from now, maybe not all said and done, but years and years from now, as we look back at the Kraken past, this year will be one that we look at and say, that was one of the Kraken seasons of all time. I know, bold claim, but this is not really a season if it isn't clear, if you haven't been able to read between the lines here early on, that I just don't really know how much the Kraken are going to be able to make happen. Which, believe me, I know is not the most optimistic or fun way to start out a season, basically saying that I don't really see the Kraken doing much of anything terribly interesting. They'll win enough games to have some fun along the way, but they'll win too many games to likely end up with a high draft pick unless they pull a New York Islanders of this last year and we're with pretty much the worst possible odds still end up with the first overall pick. So it's possible. I think they could be in that range to get maybe the 10th best odds, which gives you a chance at first place, or 11th best odds, which gives you a chance at first place. But I think there's a pretty good chance that they end up in the window of kind of 12, 13, 14. Not quite good enough to realistically think that you're going to make it into the playoffs in the last couple weeks of the season, but also not bad enough that you have a realistic shot of getting the first overall pick, or maybe even no shot at getting the first overall pick. I do think, with that being said, then obviously the Kraken will probably end up with more points in the standings this year than they did last year, but not much of that is because of any changes they made in the roster, and that is largely it's the main reason that I don't really see the Kraken making it into the postseason this year. Now, usually I do try to be a little bit more optimistic than that, try and see the bright side and the potential of a team. Last year, even, I thought there was a decent chance the Kraken could make the playoffs with a shift in coaching philosophy to more of a north-south, fast-paced, up and down the ice game, something that might get the offense going of some of these younger players like a Matty Beniers or a Shane Wright. And while the offense did get a little bit better, throw up some of the numbers from last year, they were middle of the pack in goals for per game and goals for at 5-on-5, which is to be expected considering special teams have still been a sore spot for this team really throughout their existence. They were better offensively, maybe not in the expected stats, but they at least managed to find ways to score goals. It wasn't enough to make up for how much worse they were defensively than really any of the Hackstall years. Pretty significantly worse defensively than any of the Hackstall years, and that much was pretty obvious if you watched any significant chunk of Kraken games last season. The team just did not have defensive focus. Guys that we're used to playing fantastic defense, like Adam Larson, even at least for chunks of a season of Jamie Alexiak, or Vince Dunn had been getting better over the last couple of years. Yeah, none of them played well defensively. Even on the forward end, none of them really played well defensively. And this is a group, well, aside from Matty Beniers, this is a group that is built to play from the back end forward, and that includes the forward end, where pretty much every forward on the team is some amount of a two-way forward. Sure, there's guys that are a little bit more offensive than defensive, but they all can hold their own at the defensive ice. You're going to see all of them back check. It's the reason that Daniel Sprong was on the team and then left twice and got benched no matter how many points he put up per minutes on the ice. The team wants to play from the back end forward, and aside from Matty Beniers, who still had a fantastic season last year defensively, the rest of the team was basically useful. It would have been nice if they were useful. They were useless in front of Joey Daccord, who did have a pretty good year until it just kind of, I think, got to be a little bit too much towards the end of the season, and he had a stretch there in kind of March and April that wasn't the best. But at that point, it's not like it really mattered that much anyway. If anything, it helped the team. Now, with all that being said, with another coaching change, I don't think that is necessarily going to be true of this team again. And I'll get into that a little bit more when I talk about maybe some of the reasons that we can think a little bit more optimistically, or at least if you want to try to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, a small chance the Kraken do make the playoffs, and there certainly is a chance. After all, while this is probably the most pessimistic I've been going into a Kraken season, certainly the second most would have been the season that they made the playoffs. And well, we can talk about how that happened and what the Kraken then would need to make another kind of Cinderella season happen like that one. But the last season, I think we know, was just not very good. They were mediocre offensively and bad defensively, and while that might not be exactly the same, I think the offense might come down and the defense will go back up. We'll see a little bit more similar to what we saw under Hackstall. Not a ton of offense, but not a ton of or a good amount of defense, but not enough offense to make up for the goals that the defense does just allow to have happen, even with a better goaltender in Decord in net. Ultimately, they just didn't make that many significant changes on the roster from last season to give me any reason to think that they're going to be good enough to make a postseason push, even with the significant changes to the coaching staff and the part of the team that's behind the bench, not actually out on the ice. I mean, honestly, I kind of think that, if anything, they've gotten worse on paper to start this season than they did last season. Now, a lot of that was due to changes that happened during the course of the year, specifically at the trade deadline when they lost Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand, as well as Brandon Tanev, but I'm not sure at the point that Tanev was at how much of a negative that really is. I mean, from the fan base perspective, sure, fans loved, well, they loved Gourde, but they definitely loved Tanev as well. I think the fans loved Tanev more than he was actually providing for the team on the ice. But either way, replacing that with Mason Marchment, another defenseman, a sixth defenseman, which, considering some of the injuries we already are seeing, guys not starting 100%, that might actually be valuable. But yeah, they just didn't add a ton. A couple bottom six guys, Mason Marchment. I mean, as far as trying to replace Gourde and Bjorkstrand is concerned, it's Marchment and then Yanni Newman or Berkeley Catton, whichever one of them stick with the team long term. Hopefully both of them do. But while Marchment has had 22 goals in each of his last two seasons with Dallas, that is a much better team offensively, and I am not expecting 20 goals out of Marchment. I think somewhere in the realm of the high teens, which is kind of the average of his previous two seasons before those last two where he had the 22 goals. I think somewhere in there is probably realistic, even if he does have a somewhat expanded role with the Kraken. This is not a team that's going to be particularly offensively focused, and ultimately I think Marchment was more brought in to be a third-line grinder and add a little bit more grit to this team that we haven't necessarily seen, a little bit more fight back. It's not going to necessarily help that Ty Cartier and Brandon Tanev aren't going to be playing significant ice time. Tanev because he's no longer on the team, and Cartier because I just don't really see a spot for him. He'll be carried as an extra forward and may make appearances in significant chunks of the season if there are injuries, which is another reason that I'm not terribly optimistic going into the season. That's really because over the last two, really even 3 seasons, the Kraken have been one of the more fortunate teams when it comes to injuries in the NHL. Now, there's still been significant injuries, obviously last season, the notable one being Jordan Eberle missing most of the season with the injury that he took early on after starting off the season very well. And yeah, that doesn't help. We also saw Decord deal with some injuries, and there's little ones here and there. Gourde was out for a chunk before he came back, right before getting traded at the deadline. But compared to the average team in the NHL, the Kraken have not dealt with nearly as many injuries as the average team. And while some of that could be conditioning and that kind of stuff and just the resources the team is providing to the players, a lot of it does come down just to luck. And well, some of that's bound to come back the other way at some point. And while the Kraken were able to not have a ton of injuries over the last couple of years, they still didn't do much with it. And aside from even the luck aspect, we're going into the season with already a team that's looking a bit bumped and bruised. You've got Dunn and Montour, who are both starting day to day. Now, even if both of them do end up starting in game one and starting the season, they are clearly not going into the season at 100%. The same can be said for Jared McCann. And then you got guys on IR like Capo Caco, for example, that was supposed to be a big part of this team. He was supposed to be part of the first line going into the season and now is likely to miss the first month. Which isn't necessarily to say that that bad luck at the start of the season or in the preseason with injuries is going to carry over into the rest of the season. But if you believe in karma or that kind of thing, injury luck balancing out over the grand scheme, then it's coming for the Kraken at some point. And if they couldn't make something happen with a team that was mostly healthy for most of a season last year, and then it got a little bit worse on paper, I just don't really see them making that push this season. So ultimately then, where do I see the Kraken finishing in the division? I'm going to say sixth. I still don't think the Sharks are quite there. That's going to be a team that will be a problem for the Kraken in the not too distant future and could be a problem for them for quite some time to come. But their time isn't quite yet. I think we'll still see them start to get slightly better, but that's still a team that's going to at least be in a top pick type of range. But maybe if some of those young guys really get going early, then they could start to make a push a little bit higher up the standings. I think the Ducks probably end up finishing seventh again behind the Kraken. Some people are seeing the Ducks as potentially a dark horse team that could really make a big turnaround this season. I don't really see it. I still think that team's kind of a mess. I don't know. I'm not really seeing what other people are seeing, and I'm sure they got a lot of young talent that again could make that push and really start to break out again this season. So if it did happen, it wouldn't be a total shock and surprise. But I still think the Ducks are probably the next most likely team to finish eighth in the division to the Sharks. And then I think the Kraken slot right in there at sixth. I mean, yeah, if things go well, and we will get to that right after this, if things go well enough for the Kraken, then maybe they can push their way up in the standings. There's some teams that I think have a chance to really have things go south and have the floor drop out from under them. But the most likely scenario that I see is that the Kraken end up finishing in the sixth slot with, and I don't really know what order they're going to go in, but for now I'm going to say Canucks finishing fifth, Flames finishing fourth, Kings finishing third. Those three teams, for various reasons, and they've got pretty different situations of why I have my reasons to think they could play well and reasons that things could really go wrong for each of those teams. But I will say with that order, I think Canucks, Flames, and then Kings. And then at the top of the division, I'm sure we're all getting kind of tired of seeing it, but I think it's pretty obvious the Golden Knights and Oilers are the two best teams in the division. Which one ends up winning the division? Who's to say? It probably has a lot to do with how healthy the Golden Knights are over the course of the year. Usually that doesn't seem like something that the Oilers have dealt with a ton of, at least not to their main guys. I feel like Mitch Marner could really work out in Vegas, and that is going to put me... I think I feel good about Vegas winning the division. Well, not good. I'd rather Vegas doesn't win the division. I'd rather neither of those teams win the division. But if I had to bet on it, which I don't, fortunately, I would say Vegas wins the division with Oilers close second, and then third is probably the only other one that makes the playoffs. I think there's a pretty good chance that 5 teams come out of the Central this season. But it's, probably Kings in third, though it could easily be either the Canucks or Flames in that spot. And then the other two fighting for a potential spot at a wild card. I don't really see any way that the Pacific ends up with 5 teams in the playoffs, but it's hockey. Anything could happen. And speaking of anything happening, as far as reasons to be, if you want to have hope going into the season, which for, my own sake, maybe I should try to have a little bit more hope so that there's a little bit more intrigue, at least as the season gets started. And I'll hang on to hope as long as I can, but I'm just not going into the season with the same expectation as I have over the last couple years, most of the Kraken existence. If the Kraken are going to make it happen, if they are going to make that Cinderella run, and what they did the second season kind of is something they'd have to do pretty similar to it, they have to play substantially better defense, which is actually one good reason, if there are 3 good reasons to think the Kraken could perform better than expectations. One is the coaching change. This team, most of them have to do with the coaching change, but this team is going to be better defensively. I would be shocked if they are not better defensively than they were last season. I even think that there's a pretty good chance that they're back up in the top 10 in most categories in the NHL defensively, like they were for pretty much the entire Hackstall era. Heck, they could even be a top 5 team like they were for chunks of the Hackstall era defensively when it comes to goals allowed, especially with Decord in net if he can continue to play the way he has over the last couple seasons, and no real reason to think he can't. This team may not let up a ton of goals. And with that, I will say that as far as the preseason is concerned, in training camp, it has been, by most accounts, you ask anybody that went to a significant chunk of the practices, and the one that I was able to go to, I could definitely confirm this, at least from that one practice. This is a team that has been worked very hard in this preseason. They're coming in having worked harder in any preseason that they have with certainly the Kraken, some of the players that have been around the league even before the Kraken said this is one of the harder preseasons, or one of the hardest that they've ever worked in a preseason. So if you believe in maybe more of kind of the style of the miracle team, I mean, maybe not quite in that same way. I don't think they're bag skating constantly after every preseason game, but a similar idea of even if they aren't the most talented team going into the season, they're going to be one of the best conditioned team, and hopefully one of the most prepared, even with a new system that might take a little bit of time for them to really get into. Fortunately, it is going to be a defensive focus system, which is clearly, I think, from what we saw last year, what this team feels more comfortable with, playing more that Hackstall back end forward style than what we saw last year, and kind of just hoping the defense works itself out as they try to push for points, which ultimately ended up coming back in their face more than it ended up working out at the other end, which I guess really shouldn't be that much of a surprise. I mean, I was trying to be optimistic going into last season, but it does kind of make sense that a team that was quite clearly built to be a defensive first team played better under a defensive first system with Hackstall than they did under the kind of run and gun style offense last year with Bielsma, and going back to another defensive focused system. And if it is a harder working defensive focused system, maybe even better. If you really want to be as optimistic as possible going into the season, then this team could be very hard to score against, especially with Decord in net. And that would be the third big reason. If you're going to pick three reasons to be optimistic going into the season about the Kraken chances, would be Joey Decord. As long as he can continue to play at the level that we've seen for the vast majority of these last two seasons and play the majority of the games, then it will certainly give the Kraken a chance at least most nights, if not pretty much every night that Decord starts. Of course, I know the other end, as far as things I didn't necessarily mention, I mean, I talked about how the team didn't really change that much last year from this year. Bringing Grubauer back, well, I mean, we like Grubauer the person, so hopefully he plays better as a backup, but the nights that Decord doesn't start, whether they go Grubauer or Murray is going to be kind of an interesting thing, I suppose, to watch, that hopefully we don't have to watch too much of. But the backup situation could really be another Achilles heel for the Kraken. But anyway, reasons to be optimistic. I'd say the coaching change and moving back to a defensive focus system which fits the roster much better is one reason to be at least optimistic or see hope going into the season. Two would be how hard they've been worked. Now, hopefully that actually pans out into something, but if this team is a harder working team, I think that's a pretty good reason to be optimistic. Now we're just basically going off of what we saw during team practices and preseason. Maybe that was just something that they felt like they had to do to try and fast track the change back to a new system. But new coaching staff, I think they really do want to work this team hard. And if, again, they aren't going to be the most talented team, they can at least try to be the most prepared and best in shape. Hopefully that doesn't turn into fatigue injuries as the season goes along. It is a very long season, but for now, at least it could get the team off to a decent start. And third, yeah, Joey Decord would be the third big reason to have some hope going into the season. Of course, if the Kraken are going to make that run to the playoffs, they are going to need some offense, and that is going to have to come. I mean, it'll certainly help if they can get a season like they did that second year, where pretty much almost half the roster had career seasons offensively. You had a fourth line that was producing quite a bit. I don't think we're necessarily going to expect a fourth line producing as much as that fourth line did, but you're going to need to pick that up with a first line or second line that does produce quite a bit more. So you're going to need to see Chandler Stevenson pick things up offensively. You're going to need to see Matty Beniers have a little bit more of a breakout, or Shane Wright have a bit of a breakout season. Some of these young guys in particular are going to need to step up offensively. You can't just be relying on Jared McCann to score 50 goals and hope that Decord doesn't allow pretty much any over the course of the season. So, is it possible? Sure. I think Beniers or Wright could easily have a breakout season. Yanni Newman and Berkeley Catton, maybe one of them just really make a big splash in their first full season in the NHL, assuming they play a full first season in the NHL. Maybe Capo Caco, once he gets back, continues to gel well with Beniers and get going. It's not impossible to see, but I would certainly say it is unlikely the Kraken score enough to win enough to make it into the playoffs. As always, I'd love to know what you think in the comments section below. If you agree with me on that, what maybe you're most looking forward to this season. The third jerseys do look, I think, pretty cool. They're starting to grow on me a little bit, as they often do. They have the third jersey logo on the center ice, which I was hoping was going to glow in the dark, and maybe it will. Maybe they're just saving that for the first game on Thursday. I guess we'll find out. I don't know. So far, what I saw in the preseason, it didn't seem like it was going to glow in the dark at all. But anyway, it would be kind of fun if it did. So at least the third jersey will be kind of fun. Hopefully the team plays better in that jersey than any other alternative to their main two that they've played in before, aside from pretty much the Winter Classic was the only game that the team has played especially well in a non-main home or away jersey. But we'll see as that goes. They played 12 games in that jersey this season, 11 home, 1 away. I'm pretty sure. I think they have 1 away game in Edmonton wearing it. But anyway, the third jersey is fun to have. Decor will be fun to watch. And even if things don't go well, there are, at least to start the season, a number of younger players, which I'm still going to include Beniers and Wright in that category, but certainly Catton and Newman, that'll be fun to see how they continue to progress into their NHL careers, and maybe if one or multiple of them can really start to break out and show some signs of the Kraken getting an offensive star to superstar level player that they're going to need if they want to build around into a core that can actually make consistent late playoff runs like the team would like to see here in the not too distant future. But with that, again, like I said, let me know in the comments. I know this has been a bit of a rambly, maybe all over the place. Just kind of going a little bit off the top of my head with some of the stats from last season as well for what to expect this season. I mean, I've given a fair amount of thought of whether or not I can realistically see a likely path for the Kraken to the playoffs. And to me right now, there isn't, but I really hope, genuinely really hope that I am wrong about that. I would love to see the Kraken in the playoffs. I suppose one other potential reason to be hopeful about the Kraken making the playoffs and having a surprise season is that the last time the Mariners made the playoffs, the Kraken made the playoffs that same, well, when the Kraken season started with the Mariners in the playoffs, they ended up making the playoffs. You know what I mean? So maybe that magic can make its way back north across downtown to Climate Pledge. And as far as that's concerned, hopefully the Mariners can win Game 5 of the ALDS, because Game 4 today was a little bit depressing. Anyway, not the best way to end a video that I know wasn't the most uplifting, but hopefully the Kraken can at least get off to a good start against one of the teams that I don't think is as good as them in the division to start off the season. I think it would be the first time that they've started a season 1-0 if they can beat the Ducks, and maybe just get the ball rolling from there. Until that first R&R, though, welcome back. And oh, by the way, I know the background looks a little bit bare. There's just some construction that's been going on in our house for the last month, or actually even a little bit over a month now. And that'll all come back once the construction is done. There's just a lot of stuff that wasn't fully secured to the walls that I didn't want rattling and falling off. So yeah, it'll be back. Don't worry, I'm not just taking down the Kraken stuff because I don't believe in them or anything like that. But yeah, until next time, stay safe out there. Be good to each other. God bless, and go Kraken. Good to be back.